The Spanish flu was the last time we had a pandemic, and it was about 100 years ago. And we thought now that we were too sophisticated for it ever to happen again. We thought we were too intelligent for it to happen, too much in control of life. However, we were wrong. It did happen. And so many unthinkable things have happened too, things that we could never have imagined. One of those things was the closing of the churches and the inability of people to come physically to Mass. And it was an incredible, and for many people still is an incredible suffering to have to bear. And yet there is hope. There are people before me today. 1/3 of the church is open. And there's great joy in that reality and seeing you. The thought of having to do Easter ceremonies again in an empty church was just unthinkable. But the reopening is still so tentative. And even though it is tentative, we cannot lose sight of its significance, nor can we be completely consumed with how we do it. Yes, it's important that we reopen the church safely and gradually. But just as the pandemic was a once-in-a-century event, and therefore the closing of the churches was a once-in-a-century event, then that means that the reopening of the churches is a once-in-a-century event too. The reopening of the churches is the most significant event in the last 100 years of life of the church in Ireland. And we have learned certain things during this pandemic that will help us in the reopening of the church, and that will enable us to reopen the church in an effective and powerful way. During this pandemic, virtual communication was a lifesaver. So many people prayed in this cathedral every day since last March, thousands of people, yet they never left their homes. You were some of those people. But as we reopen, we will realize that FaceTime is not the same as real time. When we listen to the gospel today, Peter and John, they didn't ask for photographs or a recording or virtual reality. They ran to the tomb immediately. They wanted to be there in person. And where the Mass is concerned, Jesus wants us to be here in person. The risen Jesus wants us to gather around him so that he can give us his life really and truly present in Holy Communion. Jesus wants us to gather around him so that he can give us the gift of eternal life when we receive Holy Communion. That is another thing that the pandemic has taught us. Life in this world is so fragile. It's so delicate. We have no grip of it at all. It's actually not possible to hold on to life and to control it. And sometimes we can fool ourselves and think that it is, but the pandemic ensured that we couldn't fool ourselves anymore. We are not in control of life, and this can cause us to panic and to be anxious and to worry. But Easter reveals to us that we don't need to panic or be anxious or worry. Easter, the risen Jesus, reveals to us that we don't actually need to try to hold on to life at all. All we need to do is to live life and to accept the gift of eternal life. And we accept the gift of eternal life by sharing fully in the life of Jesus now. People say that the number coming back to church after the pandemic will be less than the number who used to come before it. And I don't know if that will be the case or not. But if people don't come to church, what will they try to hold on to? What will give them stability? Is it possible to fool ourselves again and convince ourselves that this world can do all of that, even though we have all evidence to prove that it can't? Are people going to try to cling on to the empty tomb, or are they going to try to cling on to the person who has risen from the dead? That's the choice that we have this Easter. Do we try to cling on to the empty tomb, or do we cling on to Jesus? We have this choice as we emerge from this pandemic. We can cling on to physical things, material things in this world, or we can cling on to the person who has defeated death. If we cling on to the person who has defeated death, it will change our whole perspective for living life. The reopening of the churches is a once-in-a-century event, and it is up to every one of us to proclaim the risen Jesus in all his glory, the one who transforms the rough wooden cross of Calvary to the golden cross of the resurrection. It is up to us to proclaim the risen Jesus as the answer to life's questions, as the stability in life's journey, as the hope for the future, as the love and the mercy that will ultimately heal all pain, as our destination if we choose it by the way we live our lives, that no pandemic, that nothing in this world can distract us from. It is up to us to proclaim the risen Jesus as the one who is more powerful than any pandemic, who is more powerful than death itself, and who lives here in the flesh in his risen body. That's what we have to proclaim. That is what the church has to proclaim if we want to seize the opportunity that the gift of the reopening of the churches is to each and every one of us today. Jesus says to us on this Easter day, "It's up to you, and I trust you."